I hadn't thought about the ring in years, not since I drove it to a pawn shop 3 towns over and slid it across a glass counter like it was on fire. The man behind the register barely looked at me. He just examined the platinum band, the flawless diamond, and nodded as if it were routine. No questions, no receipt. I walked out without a backward glance, the door clicking shut behind me like the final period on a chapter I never meant to write. But it wasn't just the ring I left behind that day. It was the version of me who had said yes too quickly, who mistook extravagance for security, who mistook attention for love. I wasn't grieving a man. I was grieving the woman I had become when I thought he was my future. My name is Savannah Blake. I'm 36 now, and 8 years ago my younger sister Jocelyn stole the man I was supposed to marry, a man who, on paper, had everything. His name was Ethan Moore, a tech investor with perfect teeth and a curated apartment in Back Bay, Boston. He proposed to me on a rooftop at Beacon Hill, champagne in one hand, a drone capturing our spontaneous moment from above. The ring was a small fortune, wrapped in velvet, flanked by flashbulbs. The kind of proposal meant to be shared, the kind meant for people who lived through other people's admiration. Everyone said we were golden, the power couple, Boston's future darlings, and for a while, I believed it. Until Jocelyn flew home for the summer. She had always had a way of entering a room like it owed her something. With Jocelyn, it wasn't that she asked for attention, she just took it, effortlessly. Loud laughs, perfectly timed pauses, eyes that scanned a crowd and knew exactly when to sparkle. She slipped into our lives like she was staging an intervention, for my wardrobe, my social calendar, my relationship. 3 weeks before the wedding, I came home to a note on my kitchen counter. One line in his handwriting, "I'm sorry." And the ring tucked into its box like an apology that never arrived. I sat in the doorway of my apartment for over an hour, not crying, not calling, just sitting there, knees pulled in, staring at that velvet box like it might vanish if I didn't blink. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember the neighbor's dog barking in short bursts through the wall. But mostly, I remember the silence, the kind that arrives when something inside you caves in. The next time I saw the ring, it was on her finger. I didn't stay in Boston after that. I packed up my life, shoved it into a used SUV with more mileage than value, and started driving. I didn't know where I was going, just that it needed to be far. Far from Beacon Hill. Far from Jocelyn. Far from the version of myself that let it all happen. Eventually, the road led me to Telluride, Colorado, a place where the sky felt too honest to lie beneath and the mountains didn't care who you used to be. I told myself I'd stay a month. I stayed for good. 3 years later, I married Caleb Rivers. He was a firefighter back then, quiet, steady, with hands that held without gripping, and a voice like old leather warmed in the sun. We met in a grief support circle at a local retreat center. He had lost his wife in a fire. I had lost my self-respect in a betrayal. He didn't try to fix me. He just showed up, again and again, until I started to believe I was someone worth staying for. We had a daughter 2 years after the wedding, Lena. She's 7 now, all soft curls and searching eyes. Her words come in delicate shapes. Some she speaks, others she draws. Autism makes expression a different language for her, but I've learned how to listen anyway. Our refrigerator is a gallery of her stories. Animals that dream, families with extra hands, stars that hold hands in the dark. Every time I look at her, I remember why I stayed, why I didn't let that betrayal define me, why I rebuilt instead of collapsing. And then, just like that, the past found me again. It was a Tuesday. The sun had softened the laundry on the back deck. I was folding bath towels on the couch while Caleb chopped garlic in the kitchen. Lena sat at the table sketching a house on stilts, humming softly to herself. My phone buzzed, Unknown number, Massachusetts area code. My hands stilled. I answered out of instinct. Hello? And then a voice I hadn't heard in 8 years, smooth, practiced, just a little too calm. Savannah, she said. It's Jocelyn. I didn't respond. She continued, Mom passed away this morning. The funeral's on Saturday, at the estate. I thought you'd want to know. She paused, then added casually, as if this were normal, as if she hadn't stolen the life I was supposed to have. You can come if you want. If I want. 8 years of silence, and that was the invitation. I'll be there, I said. Not for her, not for Mom, but because I needed to see what was left of that world, and more importantly, who I had become now that I wasn't part of it. What Jocelyn didn't know was that I wouldn't be coming alone. She didn't know about Caleb, or Lena, or the life I'd built in the ruins she thought she left behind. And she certainly didn't know that this wasn't a visit. This wasn't closure. This was the beginning. The funeral was set for Saturday. That gave me 4 days, not to pack, but to brace, to steady myself for what I knew I'd be walking into, a house full of curated sadness, scripted hugs, and people who had made it clear long ago that silence was easier than choosing me, and at the center of that curated grief would be Jocelyn. She didn't need to say it, but I knew what that call had really been. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a power play, a reminder that she still got to be the one who broke the news. Jocelyn always delivered pain like it was a gift only she was brave enough to wrap. I didn't cry when she told me Mom had passed. I felt still, not cold, but hollow in a way that suggested the grieving had ended years ago. When I hung up, I sat frozen on the edge of the couch, laundry still in my lap, the sunlight from the kitchen window catching the hem of Caleb's flannel shirt. He must have felt something shift. I heard the knife pause on the cutting board, then quiet footsteps crossing the kitchen tile. He didn't speak right away. He just lowered himself beside me, solid and calm like he always was. Jocelyn called, I said. The words scratched their way up my throat like they'd been stored too long. Mom's gone. He exhaled, steady and low. I'm sorry. I nodded, still not sure what emotion I was supposed to pick from the pile. The funeral's in Glenridge, at the estate. Are you going? He asked, already knowing the answer. I said I would. He reached for my hand, his thumb tracing a slow circle across my knuckle. Then I'm coming with you. I closed my eyes for a moment and leaned into his shoulder. That's the thing about Caleb. He doesn't fill silence with answers. He just stands there until the silence feels safe again. Lena sat nearby, legs tucked under her, sketching something on the living room rug. She hummed to herself, her world still unbothered, still soft. And I realized, whatever storm we were about to walk into, I had to protect that. Even if it meant returning to the wreckage, especially if it meant that. That night I packed with quiet precision, not just clothes, but armor. A black dress for the service, understated and long-sleeved, a wool coat, boots that clicked on marble and didn't sink in grass, and a necklace that had once belonged to Aunt Delilah, the only woman in my family who ever taught me that love didn't need an audience to be real. I didn't pack red, not this time. I wasn't there to burn anything down, I was there to make sure I didn't disappear. The next morning, we drove through the Colorado mountains, their peaks trailing frost like breath. The sky stretched wide and forgiving behind us, but the air sharpened as we crossed back into Massachusetts. Glenridge didn't change. It never did. Trimmed hedges, stone columns, houses with expensive silence behind every window. Everything looked exactly as it had when I left, except me. Our family's estate sat behind wrought iron gates, the kind that didn't swing open. They judged you first. The brick facade loomed, dressed in tasteful mourning. Jocelyn style, white florals, black ribbon. Leased cars parked in straight rows, the kind of funeral that looks great on a foundation's website. Caleb pulled to a stop near the drive. I stared out the window for a beat too long, not frozen, just making peace with what was about to be unearthed. We stepped out together. The air was brittle, like something that used to be warm had changed its mind. Jocelyn stood on the porch in black silk and a matching veil, grief as an aesthetic. Her expression didn't change when she saw me, but her spine reacted. Just a flicker. Enough. She descended the steps slowly, each click of her heel a punctuation mark. "Sis," she said, voice airy like always. "I'm glad you came." I tilted my head. I said I would. No warmth, just truth. Her gaze shifted to Caleb. "And you are?" He stepped forward, offering his hand. "Caleb Rivers, Savannah's husband." She blinked, just once. Then the practiced smile returned, thinner now, like a stretched seam. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "come in, everyone's here." The second I crossed the threshold, it all hit me, not like a punch, like a hum I hadn't realized was still vibrating beneath my ribs. The foyer still smelled like lemon polish. The hall still carried echoes. The photo frames lining the walls hadn't changed. Recitals, birthdays, fundraisers, Jocelyn front and center in every shot. Me somewhere off to the side, half out of frame, always a little blurred. Guests arrived in a soft shuffle, neighbors, family friends, people who hadn't spoken my name in years, but greeted Jocelyn like royalty. "You've done such a beautiful job. Your mother would be proud." It was all staged affection, well rehearsed. When they looked at me, there was always a pause, like my face was a question they couldn't quite place. I wasn't the scandal anymore. I was the footnote. One woman, dressed in beige lace, leaned toward Caleb with forced curiosity. "And how long have you two been married?" 5 years, he answered easily. "We live in Telluride." Her eyebrows rose. "Oh, that's far." "Exactly," I said. "Far enough to start over." The service began at noon. Jocelyn read the eulogy. Her voice was smooth, just cracked enough to feel believable. She spoke about our mother's taste, her dinner parties, her Christmas trees. She didn't mention the slammed doors, the silent punishments, or the time she told me I must have driven Ethan away. But then again, Jocelyn never did like messy truths. She preferred edits. I sat front row, hands folded tight in my lap, Caleb beside me like a stone I could hold on to. When Jocelyn stepped down from the podium, she didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The performance had ended. But the real show, the part without the script, was just beginning. The reception after the funeral was held in the conservatory behind the estate, a wide glass-walled room that once housed my mother's orchids. Jocelyn had converted it into a cocktail garden years ago. The sunlight that filtered through the roof now caught the rim of champagne flutes and flickered over carefully arranged canapé trays. It was elegant, curated, cold. I stood near the back, sipping tea instead of wine, watching the flow of small talk drift around the room like fog. Jocelyn was in the center, of course, accepting condolences, smiling faintly, her grief painted in perfect brush strokes. She never overacted. She didn't need to. That was her magic. She made lies feel like manners. Caleb stayed close but quiet, his hand occasionally brushing the small of my back, grounding me. Lena sat on a cushioned bench near the window, sketching in a notebook she carried everywhere. She was drawing vines across a brick wall. They curled and tangled like thoughts. Aunt Caroline approached me holding a plate of shrimp toast, her pearls tight around her neck. "It's good you came," she said. "Jocelyn mentioned you might not." "I almost didn't," I admitted. She nodded, not surprised. "Families are messy, but she's been very strong." I looked across the room at my sister's silhouette against the light. "Yes," I said, "she always is when there's an audience." Caroline gave a tight smile. "Well, your mother had good taste in drama, if nothing else." It was the kind of comment only old family could get away with, equal parts insult and compliment. She turned to go before I could respond. I didn't chase her. Later, the lawyer arrived. Her name was Margaret Ellison. Sharp suit, short gray bob, a presence that cut through the air like a paper knife. I recognized her. She had handled our family's legal affairs for years. Mom had trusted her, but only as far as she could be watched. Jocelyn walked over to greet her with a hug that didn't quite land. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "thank you for coming. I assume we'll be doing the reading tomorrow?" Margaret gave a curt nod. "Yes, 11 a.m. at the Glenridge office." "Lovely," Jocelyn purred, then added, "I assume everything is in place?" Margaret didn't answer that directly. She glanced over at me, her eyes lingering. That's when I felt it, that flicker beneath the surface. Something more than just a state division. Something Mom had put in motion that Jocelyn didn't expect. I didn't say a word. Not yet. But a knot had already begun to tighten at the base of my throat. After the reception, guests filtered out in clusters. Caleb and I helped Lena pack up her drawings. Jocelyn was speaking with one of Mom's bridge club friends when I passed her. She turned suddenly and caught my arm, gently, but firm. "You looked beautiful today," she said, "like old times." I raised a brow. "I don't remember old times being beautiful." Her smile didn't move. "Well, you were always so dramatic." I leaned in slightly. "Funny. I was just thinking that about you." Her grip stiffened for half a second, but she let go. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be, Savannah. We're adults now." "Yes," I said, stepping back, "and adults tell the truth. Eventually." She tilted her head. "What truth are you talking about?" "That's the thing about truth," I said. "You don't always see it coming." That night, back at the hotel, I lay in bed unable to sleep. Caleb was already breathing slow beside me. I watched the ceiling fan spin in lazy circles and listened to the silence press in around me. 1,000 things circled in my head. The way Margaret had looked at me, Jocelyn's tightening mask, the will reading ahead, and a single sentence from years ago. "You don't belong here anymore." My mother had said that to me the day I moved out. I don't even remember what sparked it. Maybe it was the fight over Ethan. Maybe it was that I stopped pretending I could stay. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. I slipped out of bed and opened Lena's sketchbook from her backpack. Her drawing from the funeral was there, our family, the estate, the vines. But in the upper left corner, almost hidden, she had drawn a woman sitting under a tree holding a letter. A letter. The next morning I called Margaret's office. "Margaret Ellison," she said crisply. "It's Savannah Blake," I replied. "I don't want to cause trouble, but I have a question before the reading." There was a pause. "Go ahead." "Did my mother leave anything unexpected? A letter? A message?" Another pause. "Not from your mother," she said carefully, "but from someone else, your Aunt Delilah." My chest tightened. "She passed 2 years ago." "I know. She left something with us in trust. It's connected to your mother's will. We'll discuss it tomorrow." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "And Savannah?" Margaret added. "Be on time. Jocelyn tends to dominate the room." I smiled faintly. Not this time. I had almost forgotten how these rooms worked, how the air in Glenridge could feel both over-perfumed and under-oxygenated, how people said each other's names with tilted heads and smiles that stopped just before sincerity. But Jocelyn hadn't forgotten. She lived for it. The morning of the will reading, the family wake was held in the East Lounge of the Glenridge Club, a sandstone estate-turned-private venue where old money still wore pearls to brunch. My mother had adored it, not for the food or the ambiance, but because it was exclusive, limited, controlled, just like her. When Caleb and I walked in, every head turned. That wasn't dramatics. That was just fact. We didn't look like the others. Caleb, with his broad shoulders and mountain-weathered face, moved with quiet confidence, a man more comfortable in turnout gear than tuxedos. I wore navy blue, no frills, no shimmer, and walked like someone who'd stopped caring what these people whispered behind wine glasses. Jocelyn stood near the fireplace, a champagne flute balanced perfectly between manicured fingers. She was in cream this time, because of course she was. Grief, but make it couture. When she saw us, something shifted behind her eyes. Not panic, not quite anger. It was more like recognition meeting resentment. And just for a moment, she didn't move. Her mouth parted as if to speak. Then she blinked, recalibrated, and floated toward us on practiced heels. "Savannah," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "And Caleb, right?" He offered his hand, polite but firm. "Yes, good to see you again." A lie, but a gentle one. She turned slightly to the small crowd around her, second cousins, her tennis partner's husband, people who followed her wellness blog but didn't really know her. "This is my sister," she announced, as if unveiling a rare artifact. "And her husband, Caleb Rivers. They came in from Colorado." There was a brief pause. A woman in a silk wrap, someone's lawyer wife maybe, tilted her head. "Rivers," she said. "Are you the same Caleb Rivers who received that congressional medal a few years ago, for that apartment fire in Boulder?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He hated being recognized for that. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. A ripple of curiosity moved through the group. Someone murmured, "He pulled 3 children out." Jocelyn's smile strained. "Well," she said, "isn't it wonderful to have such a grounded addition to the family?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. Her eyes were already scanning me again, searching for cracks. She wouldn't find any today. Later, as the crowd thinned and people moved toward coffee and tiny lemon bars, Caleb leaned in and whispered, "Your sister likes control. Doesn't like losing it." I smirked. "It's her religion. She sees me as a threat." "She should." He reached for my hand. "You okay?" I nodded. "Actually, yes. I never thought I'd be able to walk into a room like this and not flinch, but I'm not the same woman I was when I left." "You're stronger now." "No," I said. "I'm clearer." Across the room, Lena was sitting cross-legged on a velvet bench, her drawing pad open on her knees. She'd been quiet all morning, which wasn't unusual, but her brow was furrowed in focus. I walked over and knelt beside her. "What are you working on, sweet girl?" She showed me her sketch. It was the room, perfectly laid out, fireplace and all. But in the corner, barely visible, was a figure. A woman, alone, standing in front of a door. "Who's that?" I asked gently. Lena tilted her head. "Aunt Joss." My chest tightened. "Why is she standing alone?" "She doesn't know how to come in." I looked at my daughter, her soft curls falling into her face, her fingers stained with graphite. And I realized she had captured something I hadn't. For all Jocelyn's power plays, her curated poise, she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control, and she knew it. Caleb appeared behind me, his voice low. "They're calling us in." Margaret Ellison's law office was just across the lawn in a restored carriage house. The reading was to be held in the main chamber, mahogany table, high windows, the scent of old paper and older secrets. We filed in. Jocelyn, me, Caroline, 2 other cousins, and Margaret. Caleb stayed outside with Lena, per my request. I didn't want her in that room. I wasn't sure I wanted to be in that room. Margaret began by reviewing the estate, liquid assets, charity bequests, property inventories. Jocelyn nodded along, poised, as if she'd already memorized every number. And maybe she had. Then Margaret paused. "There is, however, a second component," she said, adjusting her glasses. "A letter of testament from Delilah Carter, your late aunt, held in legal trust until this reading." The air changed. Jocelyn blinked. "Delilah?" "Yes," Margaret said. "She left specific instructions." From her case folder, she pulled a single sealed envelope and handed it to me. I hesitated, broke the seal, and began to read. "Savannah. If you're reading this, then Jocelyn has already spun the room into her version of events. Let her. But you need to know this. Your mother and I fought for years about how she treated you, and before she passed, she told me she regretted many things. I made her promise to include something in the will for you, something untouched by Jocelyn's influence. And she agreed. I've left you my private cabin at Cypress Lake. It's yours now. Keys and title are with Margaret. It's where I went when I needed to breathe. I hope it gives you the same freedom it gave me. Love always, Delilah. I looked up, breath caught in my throat. Jocelyn's lips parted. Wait, what cabin? Margaret placed the deed on the table. Cypress Lake Lodge. Fully paid, no liens. Now Savannah's. Jocelyn's face paled just for a moment. That should have been— It isn't, Margaret said sharply. The room was silent, and in that silence, I finally understood what second-chance love meant. It wasn't just about Caleb. It wasn't even about Ethan. It was about this, being chosen not for perfection or performance, but for truth, for survival, for being the one who stayed soft in a world that wanted you bitter. When you've been written out of a story long enough, you stop expecting anyone to hand you a microphone. You stop imagining people would care what you have to say, because the role you were assigned was quiet, forgettable, background. So when Jocelyn stood up at the post-reading reception that evening, tapping a spoon lightly to her champagne glass, I knew what was coming. A speech. She couldn't resist a stage. We were gathered again, this time in the formal dining hall of the Glenridge Club. Dim chandeliers, linen-draped tables, soft jazz humming in the background. It was meant to be a celebration of life, a final toast. But it felt more like a staged apology tour Jocelyn had curated for optics. She stood at the head of the room, elegant in posture, a crystal flute in her right hand, and that signature half-smile that suggested grief was just another emotion she knew how to style. "I want to thank you all," she began, "for being here to honor my mother's legacy. I know she was a complicated woman, but she loved this family. And in the end, love is what remains." There were polite nods, a few murmurs of approval. "She wasn't perfect," Jocelyn continued, eyes shining just enough, "but she was fierce. She built a life from very little and gave us a foundation to stand on. She taught me how to be strong, how to lead, how to love through hardship. And though my sister and I had our differences—" She paused here, eyes glancing toward me. "This week has been a powerful reminder of what matters most: family, forgiveness, forward movement." There it was, the dramatic reunion narrative. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. A few people clapped, unsure. Some turned to look at me, as if waiting for a sign that the script was true. I gave them nothing. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, Caleb's presence a steady line beside me. What she didn't say was what she'd taken. What she didn't acknowledge was the wound she'd written off as necessary. This wasn't reunion, this was damage control. When Jocelyn sat down, the room exhaled. She turned slightly toward me, gave a small nod, as if we'd shared a moment. I met her gaze evenly. No smile, no signal, just stillness. That seemed to rattle her more than outrage would've. After dinner, I slipped outside. The patio overlooked a garden still recovering from late autumn. Leaves rustled gently in the breeze. The air was cool, but not cruel. I stood by the edge of the railing, watching the wind play through brittle hydrangeas. I didn't hear her footsteps, but I wasn't surprised when she appeared beside me. "You didn't clap," she said softly. "You didn't say anything worth clapping for." She exhaled a quiet laugh. "Still sharp." "No," I said, "just done pretending." She looked out over the garden, lips tightening. "You're upset about the cabin." "I didn't know about the cabin. I'm upset about what you think the cabin is." Her gaze turned to me. "And what's that?" "Leverage, control, your narrative." "You think everything is about power," she said, turning away. "No," I corrected. "I think everything is about truth, and you've spent your life avoiding it." She stepped back. "What truth, Savannah? That Ethan left you? That I was better for him?" I blinked once. "That wasn't love. That was conquest. You wanted what I had because you didn't know how to build your own." Her cheeks flushed. You think I haven't paid a price for any of this? He's gone. The money's gone. I built everything from scratch after that." "With borrowed lies," I said. She flinched, just slightly. "You think you're so pure now? Just because you moved to the mountains and married some firefighter with good morals?" "No," I said, voice low. "I think I'm healed. There's a difference." Jocelyn crossed her arms. "Do you want to fight? Or do you want to move on?" "I want to remember my mother in peace, and I want to leave here knowing you won't twist what little truth remains." She stared at me for a long time. "You're not the same person." "No," I said, "but you are." And with that, I walked back inside. That night, back at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. Caleb sat on the sofa, reading a local paper. Lena was tucked in, clutching her sketchbook under one arm, a small smile still on her lips from something we'd laughed about earlier. I watched them both for a long time. This quiet family I'd built from nothing but raw, unglamorous survival. "I should have said something," I murmured, finally speaking. Caleb looked up. "At the dinner?" "At her speech. I should have stood up and corrected it. Said what really happened. What she really did." He closed the paper, setting it aside. "Would it have changed her? Or just cost you peace?" I didn't answer. I already knew. It would have been satisfying but not healing. And I wasn't here for revenge in the way Jocelyn probably feared. I wasn't interested in blowing up her lies with public scenes. I wanted something quieter, something deeper, something that would last. That night I opened my laptop, pulled up the property records for Cypress Lake, scrolled through the inspection reports, the zoning laws, the renovation permits, and somewhere between the tax ID and the foundation report, I saw the start of something that wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about building forward, not in response to her, but in honor of what I'd found. Grief does something strange to time. It stretches the quiet parts and speeds up the ones that ache. In the days following the will reading, Glenridge moved through a fog that felt suspended, like everything was waiting for someone to either break down or walk away. Jocelyn did neither. She smiled, she performed, she stayed perfectly composed in that quiet storm of post-funeral logistics and soft condolences. But something in her was shifting. I saw it in the small things, the slightly delayed reactions, the faint tension in her shoulders when people mentioned the cabin, the way she looked at me and quickly looked away. She didn't ask about the property again, but I knew it was still sitting at the edge of her mind like an unopened door. We planned to leave the next morning. Caleb had already been looking into restoration permits for the lodge. He didn't say much, but I could feel his excitement in the way he casually mentioned the beams might need reinforcing or how winter access would need rerouting. He wasn't pushing me. He was just quietly dreaming forward. That's the thing about Caleb. He doesn't ask you to move on. He simply starts walking beside you, confident that one day you'll realize you're not standing still anymore. Lena, meanwhile, had grown even quieter than usual. She wasn't upset, not exactly, just observing, processing. Her sketchbook never left her side. At breakfast, at the park, even in the hotel lobby. She drew everything, people, buildings, the sky shifting over the hills. But there was something different about the way she was filling the pages, more deliberate, more symbolic. Her drawings weren't just what she saw. They were what she felt, and I could feel something coming through them, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. That afternoon, as I sat on the floor of the hotel room with her, I finally asked, "Can I see what you're working on?" She nodded and turned the page toward me. It was the Glenridge Club dining room, drawn with intricate precision. The chandeliers, the patterned carpet, the exact placement of each chair. But at the center, there were only two people, me and Jocelyn. Everyone else faded into shadow, their features vague and indistinct. I was standing, Jocelyn was seated, and between us was a large empty oval that Lena had outlined in soft pencil. It wasn't a table, it was a mirror. "What is this part here?" I asked, pointing gently to the oval. "That's what you were showing her," Lena said without hesitation. "What was I showing her?" "Her face," she whispered. But she wasn't ready to see it. I felt my throat tighten. Lena returned to her drawing, unfazed. But I stared at that page for a long time, understanding more in her sketch than I had in a week's worth of words. That evening, we went back to the cemetery one last time. The sun was lowering, casting long shadows over the headstones. Jocelyn was already there when we arrived, kneeling beside our mother's grave, rearranging the lilies she'd placed like she was styling a magazine cover. She didn't stand when she saw us, but I could feel her register our presence. I stayed a few feet back, placing a single white tulip near the edge of the plot. Not for Mom, not even for Jocelyn. For Delilah. She had believed that pain didn't need to be passed forward, that it could end if someone chose to stop carrying it. I wanted to believe that too. As I turned to leave, Jocelyn rose and stepped toward me. Her tone was different, not polished, not performative, just tired. "Lena's drawings," she said. "They're beautiful." "She sees more than we do sometimes," I replied. "I think I used to think you were imagining that. But she sees things that are real, things we don't even know we're showing." I said nothing. She shifted her weight. "She drew me, looking at you." "She showed you?" "No," Jocelyn said, "but I didn't need her to. I saw it in her lines. I saw it in you." For the first time in years, I saw something in her face I couldn't immediately categorize. Vulnerability, maybe. Or fatigue. Or just the sheer weight of being someone you're not for so long. You've forgotten what your real reflection looks like. "I used to think you had it easier," she admitted. "Being quiet, being smaller. People expected less from you. I thought that was freedom." "It wasn't," I said. "It was invisibility." Her voice caught, just slightly. "I thought being seen meant being loved." We stood in silence for a while. Nothing about it felt reconciled, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just two women standing in a place full of memories they'd inherited and wounds they didn't ask for. Later that night, we loaded the car to head back to Colorado. Caleb drove, steady and calm as ever, and Lena curled up in the back seat with her sketchbook clutched against her chest. The road out of Glenridge was long and tree-lined, the sky just starting to darken, folds of violet and gold slipping over the treetops. I turned in my seat to check on her. She was asleep, her arms curled around her journal like it held something precious. When I carefully opened it, not wanting to wake her, I saw her newest drawing. The lake house, windows open, light spilling out onto the porch. Two women standing outside, one with a hammer, the other with a rolled-up blueprint, and in the grass between them, a little girl laughing with her arms stretched wide toward the sun. I didn't cry, but something unknotted quietly inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But freedom. The road to Cypress Lake was barely paved, curling through a corridor of pine and rock as if daring outsiders to turn back. It took nearly 4 hours to reach it from Glenridge. By the time we arrived, the sun was low in the sky, bleeding amber over the water's edge. Caleb parked just beyond the gate, an old wrought iron arch that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in years. The gravel crunched beneath our tires, the kind of sound that makes a person feel like they're entering somewhere private, somewhere sacred. I stepped out of the car and inhaled. The air was cooler here, thinner somehow, like it hadn't been touched by anything artificial in a long time. The lodge itself stood about 30 yards from the shore, weathered but dignified, with wraparound windows and a porch that faced west. It didn't look like something passed down through generations. It looked like a place someone built to escape generations altogether. Lena climbed out behind me, holding her sketchbook under one arm. Caleb opened the trunk and retrieved the small duffel bags we'd brought, just enough for a long weekend. We weren't sure how long we'd stay, but something in me already knew we wouldn't leave the same way we came. The key Margaret had given me fit easily in the lock. I turned the knob, pushed open the door, and stepped into a room that felt like memory. There was no dust, no cobwebs, just clean, quiet intention. The walls were a soft, warm beige, the floors wide-planked wood. A stone fireplace dominated the living room, and on the mantel a photo of Aunt Delilah in her garden smiled back at me. She was younger in it, mid-40s maybe, but her eyes held the same fire they always had, the same knowing look that told you she'd seen more than she said. On the table, just inside the door, was a cream-colored envelope, my name written in her slanted, sure handwriting. I stared at it for a long second before picking it up. Caleb, sensing something sacred, ushered Lena to the back room to let me read in peace. I opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a letter, and beneath it a folded document I didn't recognize at first. The letter was short. Savannah. If you've made it here, then everything went according to plan. I knew Jocelyn would contest your mother's version of the will. I prepared for that. But this is mine. Mine alone. The cabin is yours, but more than that, so is what I built here. You'll find in the drawer beneath the fireplace a folder marked Foundation. Inside is the legal trust to convert this lodge into a non-profit retreat space, something I never had the health or time to finish. But you do, and I believe you will. Tell your truth, Savannah. Make space for others to do the same. With love and legacy, Delilah. My hands trembled slightly as I set the letter down. I opened the drawer beneath the hearth, found the folder exactly where she'd said, and pulled out a thick set of papers. Formation documents, architectural sketches, zoning permits, even a name proposal, the Quiet House. I blinked at that, stunned. She hadn't just left me a cabin, she'd left me a purpose. When I showed Caleb the papers later that evening, he read them cover to cover without interruption. When he finally looked up, his expression was thoughtful, serious. She planned this, he said. All of it. For you. She knew I'd need something that wasn't just survival. She knew you'd grow out of revenge. I smiled faintly. She knew I'd need to plant something good where the damage had been. We sat in silence for a while. Lena was asleep on the sofa, sketchbook open beside her. Her newest drawing was of the fireplace, but this time there was a fire burning and 2 mugs on the hearth. She had even drawn Aunt Delilah's photograph above it, her expression somehow softer than the real one. I thought about the word legacy, not the kind written in wills or embossed on marble, the kind you build when no one is watching, the kind that takes root in silence and blooms in someone else's future. This wasn't just a hidden will, it was a declaration of faith, Delilah's final way of saying, I see you. The next morning I called Margaret. I found it, I said. I thought you might. She left more than just the deed. Yes, she replied. Delilah believed in long games. I want to activate it, the nonprofit, the retreat. There was a pause, and then the softest hint of a smile in her voice. Then let's begin. We spent the rest of the day walking the property. Caleb noted the structural integrity of the deck, the foundation lines near the back wall. I took photos, made lists. Lena sketched the trees. In one corner of the page, she had drawn a group of women sitting in a circle on the porch, talking, laughing. In her world, it had already begun. When we returned to Glenridge later that week to tie up loose ends, Jocelyn was waiting. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from grief, but the kind that settles after a long fight no one won. We sat at Margaret's office one last time to finalize the documentation. Jocelyn didn't speak much. She signed what she had to. I signed mine. But as we were leaving, she paused at the door, turned to me. No audience, no spotlight. You know, she said, I used to think you'd disappear. That without him, without us, you'd fade. I looked at her, steady. I did disappear, but not the way you think. I disappeared into myself, and I came back someone you never learned to recognize. She nodded once. I still don't. That's okay, I said, stepping past her. You weren't meant to. Outside, the air smelled like the edge of something new. I held the folder to my chest, full of plans and permits and blueprints, and for the first time the weight felt like something I could carry, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. This wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the start of something I got to write in my own handwriting. We were back in Glenridge only a day before it began again. Not overtly, not with fireworks, but with the kind of slow, carefully measured gestures Jocelyn had mastered since childhood. She showed up at Margaret's office under the guise of needing to sign one more document, but I could feel it before she even walked in. The shift in energy, the way the room sharpened like it was preparing to receive her. Margaret gave me a look, curious, almost sympathetic, and I simply nodded. Let her speak. Jocelyn entered in muted gray this time, tasteful, somber, just conservative enough to suggest she was above vanity now. She set her bag down with an ease that looked like ownership and greeted me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Savannah, I didn't expect you to still be here." Her tone was even, but I heard it, the subtle sting beneath the surface, like sugar dusted over a lemon slice. "I thought you'd be halfway back to the mountains by now." I smiled gently. "We stayed to file the nonprofit paperwork. The lodge is moving forward." Her lips parted, just slightly. "Ah, yes. The Legacy Project A pause." Delilah always did have a flair for drama. She turned to Margaret, who was flipping through a folder as if to give us space. "I suppose you're the only one in the family who needed a trust to feel chosen." It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the familiarity, the precision. Jocelyn didn't stab wildly. She aimed for old bruises. I looked at her, quiet but steady. "Is that what you think this is about?" "It's always been about that," she said. "Us, competing for a mother who never gave enough, a father who disappeared before we could prove ourselves, a family that learned to survive on appearances. Don't act like you've transcended all that just because you moved to the Rockies and married integrity." It would have been easier to snap back, to fight her with the same venom, but I didn't feel that weight anymore. "We were never in a race," I said. "That was your illusion, not mine." Jocelyn stiffened. "It's easy to say that when you're finally the one who ends up with something. You mean something you can't control." The words landed between us like glass. Margaret cleared her throat softly and stood. "Ladies, if you need a moment." "No," I said. "We're done here." I turned to Jocelyn one last time. "You can keep trying to perform forgiveness, or you can do the harder thing and start actually healing. I'm not your competitor anymore, Joss. I never really was." She didn't respond, not because she didn't have something to say, but because, for the first time, I think she realized I didn't need to hear it. That evening, back at the hotel, I found Lena in the window seat with her sketchbook open in her lap. She was drawing two birds, one perched high on a branch looking out, the other smaller, sitting lower, wings tucked, eyes closed. They weren't facing each other, but they shared the same tree. I slid beside her and asked, "Is that us?" She shook her head. "That's you and Aunt Joss." "Really?" I asked. "What are we doing?" "You're both waiting," she said. "But different things." I blinked slowly. "What's she waiting for?" "To be seen." "And me?" She looked up at me with that unfiltered truth only children carry. "To stop needing to be." I didn't speak. I just wrapped an arm around her and kissed the top of her head. The warmth of her body against mine, the rhythm of her breathing, reminded me that whatever race Jocelyn thought we were in, I'd already won. Not because of money. Not because of property, but because I was building something with love instead of survival. Caleb returned from a quick call with the contractor, updating me on potential structural reinforcements for the lodge and a plan for year-round water access. I told him about the meeting, about Jocelyn's words. He listened without judgment, then said something I hadn't expected. "She's losing the only game she ever learned to play. That's grief too, in its own way." It hit me harder than I thought it would, because he was right. Jocelyn wasn't just angry. She was grieving the identity she'd constructed. The daughter who always won, the sister who took what she wanted and shaped it into proof of worth. But now the game had shifted, and she didn't know the rules anymore. That night, I lay awake long after Lena fell asleep. I stared at the ceiling of our hotel room, thinking about all the years Jocelyn and I had spent orbiting the same family sun, casting shadows over each other. Every act of achievement, every mistake, every stolen glance from a parent trying to divide fairness like currency, It had all been a performance, and somewhere in that mess, we'd forgotten how to be sisters. Or maybe we'd never learned. But something in me, soft, hard-earned and unexpected, hoped that one day, if I left the door open just long enough, Jocelyn might choose to walk through it, not as the rival, not as the echo of our parents' brokenness, just as herself. If that day came, I'd be ready. But I wouldn't wait for it. I had almost made it out of Glenridge without another confrontation. One more brunch, one final document signed, a handful of polite nods, and I'd be back on the road toward the life I'd chosen over the one that had been forced on me. But of course, Jocelyn had one more performance in her. It happened at the community memorial event, a follow-up gathering hosted by the Historical Society in our mother's name. She'd once served as its vice president, mostly for the photo ops, and left behind a modest endowment that came with a bench, a plaque, and the need for everyone in town to wear beige and pretend they knew her beyond the surface. The event was held in the Glenridge greenhouse of all places, glass walls, trimmed hedges, quiet clinking of iced tea glasses. I stood near the back with Caleb and Lena, hoping to keep a low profile. I had no intention of making speeches. I had already done the hard part, endured the will, reclaimed the cabin, dismantled the sibling rivalry that had dictated my childhood. But Jocelyn, standing under a string of fairy lights beside a canvas portrait of our mother, had other plans. She tapped her spoon to the edge of her glass again. That sound, the delicate chime that always meant she was about to take control, still made something in me tighten. People turned, quieted. She smiled, subdued, as if grief had hollowed her just enough to make her seem fragile. "Thank you all for being here," she began, voice soft and tremulous. "It means the world to our family that you've come to honor our mother's legacy. She was a woman of vision, resilience, and impeccable taste." There were nods, small murmurs of agreement. Someone dabbed at their eyes. "She raised 2 daughters," Jocelyn continued, "very different, but equally devoted in our own ways. It wasn't always easy. Families never are. But I believe, especially now, that reconciliation is the most powerful tribute we can offer the ones we've lost." She paused, then turned toward me. "Savannah, I want to thank you for coming home. It's good that we're all together again." And there it was. The illusion of reunion, delivered not as truth, but as spectacle. It wasn't for me. It wasn't even for her. It was for them, for the audience, for the legacy of performance. A funeral drama, staged and rehearsed, wrapped in a bow of forgiveness neither of us had offered. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I stepped forward. "I wasn't going to speak," I said calmly, "but I think I need to." The crowd shifted slightly. Jocelyn froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. But I made sure every word was clear. "My mother loved many things," I began. "Beauty, order, appearances. And for a long time, I believed that love was something you earned through performance, through perfection, through staying quiet when it hurt." I paused. "But silence is not the same as peace." The room was still now. Jocelyn's smile had faded, but she didn't stop me. "My sister and I have walked very different paths," I continued, "and I won't stand here and pretend those paths were ever equal. I was not always seen, I was not always chosen, and I was not always safe in this family, but I survived it, and I grew because of it, not because I was given permission to, but because I found something worth becoming louder for." I looked around the room, not to accuse, but to hold space for the truth. Grief doesn't make us saints, and funerals aren't redemption tours, but they are an opportunity, a chance to stop repeating what we were taught and start choosing who we want to be. I didn't wait for applause. I stepped back, returned to Lena and Caleb, and felt the weight of years lift off my chest. Not all of it, but enough. Later, after the guests had started drifting away, Jocelyn approached me in the courtyard. Her jaw was set, her eyes glossy. "You embarrassed me," she said, quiet but pointed. "No," I said. "I told the truth. For once." "You could have spoken to me in private." "You could have told the truth in private." She looked away. You think this is noble? Speaking in parables in front of strangers? No, I said. I think it's necessary. For Lena. For me. For anyone watching who thought they were alone in families that call silence love. Her eyes narrowed. You think you're healed now? That makes you better? I don't think I'm better, I said softly. I think I'm free. And with that, I walked away. We left the next morning. The lodge still needed repairs, and there was much to be done. But the most important parts were already laid. Truth, healing, the kind of clarity that doesn't need to be shouted. Jocelyn didn't call. She didn't text. And I didn't expect her to. But I kept the speech, rewritten in my own words, tucked into the back of my journal. Not to revisit what I said, but to remember what it cost to say it. Because when a funeral drama becomes a showdown over truth, the only person you have to answer to is yourself. By the time we returned to the mountain lodge, Lena was already drawing again. She sat by the window, sketching trees and clouds with new confidence. The silence of Glenridge was behind us, and so was the weight of proving anything to anyone. I didn't realize how loud my old life had been until I stepped back into the one I built myself. Caleb poured coffee in the kitchen while I unpacked the last box of my mother's things. Most of it would be donated. A few letters, a small jewelry box, and one framed photo would stay. Not because I needed to remember her, but because I needed to remember what not to become. You okay? Caleb asked, leaning against the counter. I nodded. For the first time in years, I actually think I am. He smiled. Good, because the lodge booking calendar is full, and we just got featured in a regional travel blog. You're officially a local destination. That was the other thing about coming home. It wasn't just about closure. It was about roots. Caleb and I had poured every spare hour and every dollar we had into restoring the lodge. It was the first thing I ever owned that felt like it reflected me. We kept the beams exposed, the floors creaky. We turned the attic into a reading nook with velvet chairs and fairy lights. Lena helped name each guest room after flowers. When we reopened the doors, it wasn't just a business. It was a declaration. I am no longer who you left behind. One afternoon, as snow began to settle along the trees outside, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name in sharp, familiar cursive. Inside was a check, $25,000, and a note, in case you need help keeping it going. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. Jocelyn never apologized the way I once dreamed she would. There was no long phone call, no tears, no grand gestures. Just this. A silent truce slipped into my mailbox like a ghost trying to make peace. I didn't cash it. I tucked it into a folder labeled Unresolved, then poured myself a glass of cider and walked the length of the property, breathing in pine and cold air and the quiet that only comes when you know who you are now. Lena ran out to meet me in the snow, cheeks red, boots heavy. "Mama, look," she said, pointing to the sky. "The clouds look like whales." I laughed, pulled her close. "You're right, big ones." We stood there a while, just watching. No phones, no noise, no need to explain who I was or what I had survived. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud, it isn't cruel, it isn't even planned. Sometimes it looks like a 7-year-old drawing wildflowers in the margins of her notebook, or a husband who shows up and stays, or a lodge that welcomes guests with fresh bread and stories instead of secrets. Sometimes revenge is personal success, and sometimes that's more than enough. Winter lingered longer in the mountains than in Glenridge. March still looked like February here, silver trees, low clouds, a hush that felt like a held breath. The lodge was quiet for once, just a few guests in the east wing. Caleb had taken Lena to the community library, and I had a rare afternoon alone. I poured a second cup of tea, lit the fire in the sitting room, and finally opened the folder labeled Unresolved, not to reread the check or the note, but to decide what to do with it. I stared at it for a long time. $25,000. That used to be everything, a lifeline. Now it just felt like residue, like she was trying to fix what couldn't be fixed with money. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel superior. Just sad, for both of us. Jocelyn had always lived in currency. Love, favor, reputation. Everything had a value, a return on investment. She didn't know what it meant to give without keeping score. So I wrote her a letter, not to send, just to say the things I needed out of my body. I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I need to live lighter. I forgive you, because I'm tired of letting your silence echo through my days. I forgive you, Jocelyn, not because you deserve it, but because I do. I folded the letter into the same envelope. Then I walked it out to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. The release was quiet, clean. That evening I made bread from scratch, something I hadn't done since before Lena was born. The smell filled the whole house, and when Caleb and Lena returned, we ate it warm, with honey butter and laughter. "Can we have a bread night every week?" Lena asked, cheeks sticky. I smiled. "Every Friday. From now on." The lodge was thriving. Reservations were full through fall. We were thinking about adding a greenhouse and an artist's cabin. Lena had made friends at school, and Caleb had started volunteering with the trail restoration group. We weren't just recovering, we were rooted. And I was beginning to understand something I hadn't known when this started. Revenge isn't always about taking something back. Sometimes it's about becoming someone so whole, so at peace, that no one can take anything from you again. That's what emotional healing looked like for me. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of fear. Not forgetting, but not flinching. And not waiting anymore for the apology that never comes. I didn't know what Jocelyn would do next. If she'd call, if she'd show up. But I knew that no matter what, I had already won. Because peace, real peace, is the power move no one sees coming. Spring arrived quietly in the mountains, green peeking through melting snow, birdsong threading its way back into the trees. The lodge came alive in a different way this season. Families arrived with muddy boots and smiling kids. Artists checked in with easels and unfinished dreams. Retired couples wandered into the sitting room and asked about the history of the beams overhead. Each guest added something invisible but lasting. One evening, I stood at the edge of the wraparound porch and watched Lena help Caleb string lanterns across the herb garden. She wore overalls streaked with dirt, her hair in a braid, her cheeks pink with joy. I'd always thought legacy came in the form of money, or names on buildings, or what people said at your funeral. But now I knew better. Legacy is what you build day after day in small, invisible ways. How you love, how you stay, how you heal. My phone buzzed. A text. From Jocelyn. "Mom's bench looks beautiful. I saw the photo in the town paper. You did a good job." It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't even affection. But it was something. I typed back, "Thanks. We added her favorite wildflowers around it. Lena thought of that." 3 dots. Then nothing. And that was fine. It didn't need to be more. I turned off my phone and walked back inside, where guests were gathering near the fire, waiting for that night's storytelling hour, something we'd started for fun and now hosted weekly. Caleb handed me a worn notebook. "Your turn to tell one." I flipped it open, then looked up and smiled. "Let me tell you a story about a woman who was supposed to marry a millionaire, but instead became something far richer." The room stilled. Guests leaned in. Because even strangers know a good revenge story when they hear one, but what they don't expect is how often revenge is simply becoming more than they said you'd be. And I had become a wife, a mother, a business owner, a storyteller, a woman who once had everything stolen and rebuilt something stronger. So I began. 8 years ago, at a funeral, I walked in with the man I married, the one who held my hand when no one else would, and across the room, my sister froze. And just like that, the story circled home. There's a quiet power in outgrowing the version of you they tried to bury, in choosing peace over applause, in no longer needing to prove you survived, because now you're simply living. My revenge wasn't about taking back what was mine. It was building a life they could never claim. To anyone listening who's been betrayed, erased, or underestimated, you don't have to fight loud, just build, and someday they'll see exactly what they lost the moment they walked away. Because revenge, the kind that lasts, is never fire. It's foundation. And legacy? That's not what they leave you. It's what you leave behind. If this story touched you, subscribe to Revenge by Seren. Because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming. Just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.